Good morning and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional District on, what the heck is today? October 10th, 2024 at 9:30 in the morning. And I'd like to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the territories of the Sechelt and Squamish Nations. We have before us an amended agenda. Are there any further changes to this agenda? No, it looks like it's probably perfect now after all the tweaking we did. So, do I see a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved, seconded, all in favor? We have an agenda, thank you. We have no presentations and delegations, but we have reports. I'd like a motion to accept all reports and communications. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Done. Thank you. First up is TIP. At least that's a nice pronounceable acronym. The Transit Improvement Program. And I'd like to turn it over to our General Manager of Community Services.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. On behalf of my colleague, Manager Kidway, who is just back from a well-deserved holiday, and our partners at BC Transit, Mr. Rob Rigma, who sends his regrets for today, I am very pleased to present to you the Transit Improvement Program for 2025-26 and the expansion priorities. As you're aware, the Transit Improvement Program, or TIPS, as we like to call it, is an annual process that the SCRD and BC Transit undertake to identify expansion opportunities and plan accordingly. Staff in BC Transit were in front of this committee back in June, providing annual ridership and performance metrics data and reviewing the Transit Future Action Plan priorities, all of which informed the recommendations that the board approved at that meeting. As per that board resolution, BC Transit has now provided an estimated cost of these expansion initiatives. And today I'm here to present this information and recommend that the SCRD approve the 3-year expansion priorities and enter into a memorandum of understanding confirming their commitment. Don't know if it's going to take a bit to catch up. My apologies, I'm just waiting for the slide to advance. I'm going to keep talking despite no slide. So the 3-year expansion initiatives are outlined in the staff report and are for the most part reflective of the recommendations that the board approved back in June. The first-year expansion focuses on efficiencies and expanded hours of the Route 90, as well as expanded hours for handy-dart services, and require a formal commitment by the board through the signing of an MOU. While years 2 and years 3 initiatives and budget planning are for planning purposes only and will be reviewed again next year as we go through our annual process. We're on slide 3 now. Slide 3 shows the proposed service hours and fleet requirements for years 1 to 3 initiatives. And I really want to get this slide on the board because it's a good visual for the board. I'm trying to do, there we go. I just don't, there we go. This is an important slide. And I'm going to walk you through it. So it's important to note that implementation of service expansion can take up to a year after approvals. So for example, in March of 2025, if BC Transit receives funding from the province to support expansion initiatives, and we're approved, full implementation of those service expansion hours will not begin until January of 2026. So 2025, as shown on the slide, and the 800 hours reflects the tweaks that we're going to make to Service Route 90 to address the ridership, the critical ridership levels and pass-ups, but they don't require additional fleet. So we can implement those by approximately May of 2025. but full service of the increases to Route 90 and to the Handy Dart service require additional fleet. And we won't receive that fleet until at least January of 2026. So you can see on 2026, the additional hours plus the 2 additional fleet. So when we get the full implementation of year 1 expansion initiatives with the addition of those 2 fleets, parking capacity at Mason Road, parking is at capacity at Mason Road for fleet related to transit. So to support year 2 expansion, which you'll see in 2027, requires additional 2 buses that we won't get until 2027. Additional off-site parking will need to be sourced and in place prior to January of 2027. With a satellite site for parking in place, year 3 initiatives, which are right now looking like it's going to be 4 to 5 buses to implement all of the year 3 initiatives identified. And that doesn't include any additional Handy Dart that might be brought forward in future expansion years. Parking can be accommodated off-site. However, this increase in fleet numbers begins to place extreme pressure on the garage facility, and further expansion after that point will be compromised and limited. BC Transit staff and SCRD staff are currently working on off-site parking options to allow for year 2 expansion, and are continuing to refine a transit facility master plan that will outline facility options to allow for future expansion. A workshop with the board is identified in November, and staff will be bringing forward a committee report before the end of the new year to provide more information on this planning requirement. So, in the meantime, staff are recommending that year 1 expansion initiatives be committed to through the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding with BC Transit, and a 2025 budget proposal be brought forward in the upcoming financial planning process that reflects these projected revenues and expenditures. And with that, staff are happy to answer any questions that the board has at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking for questions from directors. There was a point at which you said an additional 4 to 5 buses, which I heard as an additional 45 buses, which gave me a minor heart attack. But I think all is well. Director Inkster.
Yeah, then they'd need 45 drivers, times 3. So obviously we've had a conversation on how long ago was that now? was it 6 weeks? It's been busy about trying to accelerate some of the expansion plans, as the two managers may have recalled, and I'm assuming that may be here in some form, and that's just a sort of query. The lag reminder to us is really important, because when we talk about what we'd like to see and then hearing how the plan needs to go out and how it still takes, you see years way ahead. It seems like a long time, and then you know that the decision's made, the application is made and or agreement to find the funding, and then the buses and then the drivers need to be done. So that's helpful. And I'm glad that you mentioned that that you're starting to look at expansion, and I'm assuming it's that footprint. So it's almost like not showing your cards, but we know where you need to go when you talk about what needs to be done within the next 2 to 3 years, it sounds like, in terms of expansion. So I'm hoping when, through you, Chair, to managers, that when they say that's proceeding, that they've identified a site, and that negotiations are proceeding. I'm hoping that's what it's interesting. Years ago, that seemed to me like too big of a yard. It seemed large up there, and now we're talking about expansion, much like our water treatment plant and our landfill. So those are my questions. I hope they weren't hidden too much in my conversational manner. Thanks.
Perhaps the yard shrank in the rain, but I'll put it over to our senior managers.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I'm going to walk through that and unpack it, I think. So yes, I was actually not here, but Manager Kidway and Mr. Ringma were here back in June for a lengthy conversation about expansion opportunities. And in fact, the board approved a different recommendation than staff put forward that was more aggressive in terms of fast tracking initiatives. And that is what is in front of you today. And in fact, what's in front of you today in year 2 is actually a little bit different, because I believe one of the recommendations the board wanted to push out to year 3, but the expansion in year 2 is a coupling. And that's explained in the staff report in terms of what we have to do, what initiatives have to stay together in order to activate that expansion. So in essence, it's actually even more aggressive than the board resolution back in June. So I think we've addressed the board's desire through these recommendations to fast track, I believe was the words you used, transit expansion. At the same time, we have been planning for short term, which is what I call off-site satellite. That's a short term, and by short term, I mean 5 to 7 years. And long term, which is 7+ years, because if we were to agree to a new facility or expanded footprint or whatever that looks like from a permanent perspective, we are quite a few years out. You cannot plan and build something overnight. So long term is 7 to 10. And that is the plan that staff will be bringing back to the board before the end of the year. Negotiations have not started because we have not received direction from the board to do so. So what we will be seeking in the fall, or not the fall, it's the fall right now, before the end of the year is direction on how to plan next year that may and that won't, that will result, if we want to keep going forward at this pace with our expansion priorities, it will result in a 2026 budget proposal related to satellite parking. There may be a budget proposal related to additional transit facility planning. So that's the piece. When you talk expansion of the transit, that's in front of you today, the service, the wheels on the ground, how that impacts the parking, the facility, the garage. I've given you a little bit of a teaser, wanting to make sure that you know that work is underway in terms of the planning and the conversations between BC Transit and SCRD. But that's the work that has yet to be undertaken in terms of the direction from the board to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to the workshop because I think we all have lots of questions about transit. I'm hoping that somebody would move a motion, perhaps the recommendations on page 2. Director Inkster, do we have a seconder? Yes, that is seconded. Are there any further questions or debate? Seeing none, I'm calling the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. And again, looking forward to the workshop. Next up on page 9 of our agenda is the Fire Department's Wildfire Deployment Post-Season Report. And it is Chief Michael.
Thank you. With the support of the SCRD board, local fire departments were able to send resources to assist other communities in need this wildfire season. This year, a structure protection crew consisting of members from Gibsons, Roberts Creek, and Half Moon Bay were deployed for a total of 22 days. It was noted that the mixed crew provided an opportunity for neighboring departments to work closely together, further enhancing our local partnerships. Myself was requested as a task force leader for a small structure defense team for the same fire. This deployment lasted for a total of 8 days. At the same time, Roberts Creek was tasked with the initial attack crew for BC Wildfire Service. The crew remained on standby while local wildfire crews were on mandatory rest time or deployed elsewhere. The final result was wildfire wildfire firefighting experience for local crews with additional revenue allocated in reserves for each of the participating departments. I'm happy to answer any questions on the report in front of you.
Thank you very much. And I think we were all fortunate that it wasn't a worse fire season this year. A vague question, I know, but this whole deployment structure, I think, was set up some years ago, and now the wildfire service is going to a full-time professional service. Is that going to affect the deployment of volunteer departments, or do you know?
I know a little. So essentially, this happened starting in 2003, where we were really caught off guard, and they started cold calling fire departments. So they put a structure in place and an agreement with the local fire departments so that we could provide surge capacity. 2017, 2018, 2021, 2023, we really had to rely on that surge capacity. So Wildfire does have plans to enact some kind of measures and systems and equipment that they won't need to rely as heavily on fire departments, but it's anticipated that the need will remain for quite some time.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Oh, Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. Not really a question, but just every time I talk to a volunteer firefighter about their deployment fighting wildfires, they light up and they're so excited to talk about it. That seems to be such an amazing experience for them. And what a great gift for the coast, too, that they get to experience and exchange information with other departments who live in wildfire country and who've gained so much experience over the years. So I think it's a fabulous opportunity for our volunteer firefighters. I'm so glad we're doing this. And I want to thank everyone who got deployed, and happy that everything went well and everybody came back really energized. So thank you.
I can't follow that up. So thank you very much. And we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is OCP Renewal Project Update. And coming up next, I expect our planning team.
Good morning. The purpose of today's report is to bring forward a summary of progress on OCP and zoning update project. The goal of the project is to update SCRD's land use planning framework to bring SCRD OCPs and zoning regulations into legislative compliance and ensure alignment with contemporary community vision and needs. In BC, the requirements of an OCP are set out in the Local Government Act. A copy of the list of requirements is provided for you on page 23 of the agenda. The requirements here also include new provincial legislation, such as Bill 44, which will also be addressed in the scope of this report and the project. In plain language, the requirements mean that SCRD is responsible for ensuring that we can meet electoral areas' projected housing needs for at least 20 years, and by design through the land use policies and regulations set out in the OCPs and zoning bylaws. This must be done while ensuring appropriate land use restrictions in areas that are hazardous or environmentally sensitive. The OCP must also include the location of future roads, major water and sewer systems to service the housing need. While not an explicit OCP requirement, it is prudent for local government to consider the most efficient and financially sustainable way to deliver services to meet housing need. So a status update for you. The mobilization phase of the project is nearing completion. There are 3 deliverables of the mobilization phase: today's report, next week's background report, and the coming housing needs report. Together, these 3 pieces form the starting place for engaging the community in visioning for the future. The next steps are community engagement, which is required as OCP's guide our community needs into the future. The community engagement strategy is attached for your review today. The board's strategic plan lenses were used in designing the engagement strategy. Referral to APCs is one of the first steps in our engagement of this report, as noted in the recommendations for today. Applying the board's equity lens to community engagement and policy development, this project will include participation opportunities that welcome all voices, including seeking voices that are less typically engaged in civic processes. So staff are here today and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. I shall await directors, but I'm going to say from the start that I have concerns about scope. The visioning process, I fear, is going to get very, very broad, very, very fast, because a lot of people, certainly in my area, my OCP has not been substantially updated in 30 years. The last version was just basically a rewrite of the 1990s version. And there are a lot of people wanting to talk about a lot of issues, many of which are outside of our jurisdiction or probably out of scope of this project. Things like tiny homes come to mind, and dark skies policies, and anti-gating provisions, and I mean, I could go on and on. I have a long, long list. Stormwater, which is largely outside of our control. So my first question to staff is, how on earth are you going to manage the scope when you start talking about visioning with the community?
Multi-part answers for you today. So the first phase of engagement, I'll describe to you briefly about how we intend to begin with the community, and that is to orient to our vision and values, most importantly. So there are many different focus areas to talk about in the course of the plan, but first we want to talk with the community about what is most important to them. Overall big visions before and values before we engage in the conversations about specific focus areas. That will come in phase 2 of our engagement with the community.
And there we go. And Chair, if I could add, staff are highly sensitized to expectation management. I would say that that is true for this project. It's true in a lot of work we do, because many aspects of SCRD service delivery fit into a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency framework. And beyond expectation management, an implementation plan is always part of official community plan updates. And so while there may be future work for SCRD to undertake to implement policies that are written into an official community plan, partnerships, advocacy, and work in other forms with other governments or agencies can form part of that implementation plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about what's first, what's second, what's third on this. When we do talk about vision, my community's vision is probably quite different from Elphinstone's vision, mostly because of our topography, geography, and also community aspirations. So I really have difficulty imagining a vision that would cover all of the Sunshine Coast. I was wondering how you would deal with that.
may also have multi-part answers for you here. So the starting place, thank you for the question. The starting place is already in current OCPs. There are a lot of similarities in our vision up and down the coast, but there are some uniquenesses as well. The intention here is to build on what currently exists, to maintain the uniquenesses for each area, and to ensure that those who have arrived to the Sunshine Coast since those original visions were communicated have an opportunity to, as well as current residents, have an opportunity to contribute to that vision looking ahead for the next 25 years as well.
Thank you. Jim Hall.
Thank you again, Chair. Again, adding the higher level lens to what Senior Planner Clark said. We, as an organization, we are going into this exercise with a very open mind. It has been as a long time since we have engaged some parts of the coast, longer in some areas than others, in questions like this. And we don't know what we're likely to hear. And so one of the steps that is identified in the project plan is a check-in on the number and structure of OCP and zoning bylaws. And that's identified as recommendation number 3 in the report today. But we know that that question hangs out there. And at this point, staff are approaching it with a very open mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Gavias.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking forward to this project. I know we have a lot going on, lots of projects need to be done. This is a huge one, but to me it is so important because we have all these big projects that need to be informed, I think, by an updated OCP. So like if we're talking about water supply, about landfill, like, well, you know, what are we shooting for here? Like, what is the future of the coast? What, you know, this would help me make decisions on those big projects that are kind of staring at us. My question is what I heard, I'm wondering what the questions will be to the residents. I heard Planner Clark say, what is most important to you? Is this kind of the feel of the first wave of engagement? Is, you know, kind of just these like high-level questions to the community, or will it be, here's the current OCP, what resonates with you in this OCP? Like, how are you going to approach, like, which questions will you ask residents?
Thank you for the question. We do intend to start broad in order to elicit vision and values. So those questions might be along the lines of, what do you love about the Sunshine Coast? Where are some areas that are challenged and why? To help us gain that kind of big picture sense of what's special to people. I don't have those refined questions for you right at this moment. And as we get into more specifics or the focus areas that we'll talk about in phase 2, each of the questions are being worked on right now and refined. But I will say a background report that is coming to you next week has a proposed set of questions for phase 2, in addition to these big picture questions that we've been talking about. And they orient to not only each of the focus areas that we intend to talk about in the project, but they also orient to the interconnection between each of them.
Thank you. Alternate Director Hardy.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in, do we know the separation of what's in Bill 44 that we can't affect change with, and then what else is on the table? Has that been communicated?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, Bill 44 includes a number of legislative amendments to the Local Government Act that are designed to support increase in housing supply. And at present, we are making excellent progress on the requirement to have an updated housing needs report, which must be adopted by the end of this year. And that was one of the reports that Planner Clark listed. And other aspects include integration of that into the next iteration of OCPs, which this project proposes to accomplish. And then there are also zoning requirements related to small-scale multi-unit housing. And SCRD did analysis at the time that the bill was brought into force that 76% of our residential parcels comply with the requirements. Further study is needed relating to servicing in certain areas. And we've applied for an extension. Those compliance with those requirements was required this year. We applied for an extension and were granted that. And this project, through updates to zoning bylaws, would ensure that we are able to fully comply with that new requirement that the province imposed on us. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going to follow up on that because I've been talking to my colleagues in other electoral areas across the province, and it seems like in the rural areas, the approaches to the Bill 44 are quite different. Cathet is not doing anything. They've been told by their planning staff that they're compliant and they don't have to do anything. The northern Fraser Fort George, they are renewing their OCPs, but they're rolling it out over multiple years, like 6 or 8 years. My concern at this point is that I have difficulty imagining us being able to do this in a year and a half. 2 years is extraordinarily short for an OCP process, and many of them lurch on for years and years and years. Our last, when we started on the zoning bylaw, which was, I think, then 310, that process started in 2018 and ran into an iceberg right away because the community was so upset about short-term rentals that nobody had any bandwidth to pay attention to the rest of the bylaw. And so the process got derailed. And correctly, I think, planning identified amendments to the bylaw to deal with short-term rentals as the next step, and did that, and then had to get back onto the whole zoning bylaw process. And then COVID happened. So that whole process, which I think was originally envisioned to take a year, took something like 4 years. And so I am thinking that the timeline proposed by staff is very optimistic, and I'm wondering if it's realistic that we could possibly get all of this done by Q1 of 2026. Staff have any comments?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Staff, do you believe that the timeline is realistic? And part of our basis for saying that is the amount of pre-work and cooperation with other local governments on the coast that has gone into the setup, the point that we're at right now. That includes regional growth analysis. It includes, I guess you could say, fortuitous timing of an updated housing needs report and a host of other strategies that the board has directed and supported. The other point I might offer is that we of course can't know if there are things like disasters that may find their way into our work plan. But staff do have, the proposed approach for this project is intended to include regular check-ins with the board. And so that enables that scope and timeline can be reviewed at any given point during the project to ensure that we are making the best progress we can and aligned in our thinking. If we, for example, if we hit upon particular issues that appear as though they will need additional consideration, a decision about how to handle that can be made with board direction, so that in aid of keeping the whole project on the board's preferred timeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Director White.
Yeah, so as a municipal director here, I just want to, I'm inclined to hear this and think philosophically, like big picture mindset question here, which I don't know if this will help directors. You can completely ignore me because I'm not in the function, but I just, listening to this conversation, it makes me wonder, as a board, do we want to be striving for best practices or worst practices? Like, I don't know if it's a good idea to go into a process like this saying it's going to take 4 years, because that's not a good OCP. I mean, if you have an OCP that takes 4 years, like it's out of date by the time you're done. I really think it's a good idea. It'd be good practice to plan for an efficient process, plan for a process that sufficiently engages the public but doesn't get hung up. You know, I think it's good to be aware of those kind of hang-ups that have happened in history, but figure those out now and figure out how you get through those in a reasonable timeline, rather than kind of plan for something that's going to be cumbersome and probably rather ineffective at the end of the day. I would never want to be, you know, in a 4-year OCP process, because it's kind of like by the time you're at the end of it, I mean, a lot of the stuff you did at the beginning are no longer relevant. We just listened to a housing needs report at the town of Gibson's earlier this week that was all about 2021, and so much of the information we either already knew or it was even kind of irrelevant by this time. So I think it's good to strive for best practices and get something done with current information and current input. I mean, if you get even, it's not good public engagement to get input in the first year of a 4-year process and then use that input 4 years later. Like, it's better to be current and really plan for an effective process. So that's just my outside impression here.
Thank you. Director Gabius.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Understanding the timeline is pretty tight, but, a lot of work, as Stav was saying, a lot of work has been done ahead of time, kind of behind the scenes a little bit, although we've been privy to it. But so I'm confident that if we, put priority on this project and we have regular check-ins, and I don't know what that looks like to us. Like, do we want to have, like, every EAS meeting we have a portion dedicated to OCP, or do we want to have a separate committee to look at OCP only? But I think, like, if we work, in collaboration with staff regularly, and we keep, the lines open, I think we could do something really great here. And I agree, like, we're in such a, it's such an interesting time to be in local government. There are so many different layers of challenges that offer a lot of opportunities. So this is in my opinion, a very important document. It could be a very powerful document, but yeah, we have to do it well. And so how do we how do we help as a board? How do we support staff in doing that? How do we communicate with our constituents? So like this, we have a role to play in that, but I think if we put our minds to it, I think this could be a really successful. And there's been, as you said, like there's been a history, there's been engagement that have gotten derailed, but I'm hoping that there's been some lessons learned from that and that staff is ready to has like developed strategies to deal with potential derailments. But yeah, anyway, so that's my thought on that. But I have a question about the APC's involvement. Like, what are we imagining here? Like, we're asking one of the recommendations is to send this report to the APCs. Do we know what we want from the APCs on this report? Do we have questions for them? Is it clear what we're expecting from them? Do we want them to be involved more as in like, here's where we're at, we'll send you the report, you tell us what you think, or do we could we have special projects for APCs? I'm not sure if like the directors have ideas or if staff have a plan in place, but I'm interested in how the role of the APCs in this project.
Thank you for the question. From staff's perspective, and included in the engagement strategy that you have in your package today, we have identified APCs as local context advisors that are key to this project. They have insight from their local areas to be able to contribute to vision, to values, and to policy development work that's coming. In this early phase, we have proposed referrals to APCs with each of those key deliverables I mentioned at the beginning of the report today to gain insight and feedback from the APCs about the content in each of those reports and to provide awareness for the process upcoming. So this early phase for the community as well as for APCs and yourselves is really about setting the stage for what's coming next.
Thank you. Alternate Director Hardy.
Thank you, Chair. In talking about timelines and what's realistic, what came to mind for me is just seeing the intersection on various projects and not a really clear picture of what that means. Like, what are the dependencies? What are the status of those projects? Those could have huge implications for the timeline and for what we need to do. Just wondered if you have comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. Staff are highly attuned to the intersection with between projects, especially as the OCP will guide the delivery of nearly every service that SCRD offers. Some of the strengths right now are work that has been directed by the board relating to fire flow. So that's an important part of servicing and integral to land use planning, as well as work that's underway related to a water strategy, recreation facility needs assessment, transit expansion, which was earlier on the agenda. So there is an opportunity to leverage the work that's been done in a lot of those projects that is up to date, relevant, and represents both community need and the board's direction. And further, externally, we are undertaking this project at the same time that the town of Gibsons and the district of Sechelt are undertaking related long-range planning work. So there's a regional opportunity for harmony in how we proceed on issues where we want to see that harmony. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Acting CAO has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to also acknowledge that I think we are undergoing a process of prioritization with all of our projects as we head into our 2025 budget process. So we haven't brought forward what that work looks like to the public yet, but it will be presented towards the end of the month. And I think that's part of the considerations that have been mentioned is how are we going to fit such an important project in our community along with the various other projects. So I think that's something that we're undergoing together through staff and the board as far as how we deal with the various important projects such as been mentioned, transit expansion, water strategies, long-range planning for our solid waste services, all the things that are in the board's strategic plan. So that's part of the consideration that I think the board is wanting to feel comfortable in consideration is when we go out to our community, we're going to be going out for various aspects. And this is such an important project. It's not disputing that that there's benefits to doing. I think it's just we're trying to wrestle with all of the things we have to do and all the important work that we have to do. So I think that's part of what we're trying together to wrestle with is acknowledging the importance of this in our community, not disputing any of the benefits, but essentially how are we going to do it all? So that's something together we do need to explore in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. The resources required to do this project are very, very large relative to other projects that we have in the queue. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that best practices comment was appropriate. Best practices to date has been doing one OCP at a time. I will point out that a municipal OCP is one OCP with all the elements that each one of our areas have. If you're trying to tackle 7 OCPs in the same time frame that you would do one OCP, it kind of boggles the mind on how that could be done and accomplished. And is in fact that best practice? I don't know. I'd like to see some examples of that. And seeing I'm the only one with a hand up, I'll then talk about my second concerns. I actually have 3 of them that hopefully will get addressed at some point. We have some things I call urgent and should be addressed immediately and seem fairly easy to resolve. And I would hate to see them get delayed because of we have to do everything before we deliver those. And so I'd like to see some way, if we're tackling this as a harmonization, how we get those done earlier in the cycle. I'm thinking things like housing, the legislative changes, those kind of things. I'd hate to see them tied up for 2 years. I'd like to see them next month. So which ones are OCPs, which ones are bylaws? Can we get some quick hitters that have to be done and they're no-brainers? And then the other part I'm concerned about is that as I look into this, it's extremely complex, very complex. What's first, what's second, what's third, what's urgent, what can wait a year? I need to understand that rather than just a single line in a plan. And that leaves me with not very much confidence in the manpower required and the money required, because without having that kind of a detail, your estimates are very high-level estimates. And so how do we control cost and creep as this thing goes is my question. That's my concern. I don't know if there's any answers, but those are the questions.
Cost and creep.
Thank you, Chair. As the ultimate project sponsor, the board is of course free to direct on any aspect of the project. And with regular check-ins, staff are confident that together we can, through professional advice that we can offer and debate and decision from the board, that we can manage those issues through the project. There is a lot of work to do, that is true. But the interconnected nature of the issue, so for example, housing, which relies on servicing, can most efficiently be looked at in the view of professional planners, most effectively be looked at through OCP and zoning bylaw policies. And so acknowledging the urgency of some of these issues, the approach that staff are proposing here is designed to provide an efficient and well-traveled path forwards. We have the majority of the hours that go into a project like this, as it's resourced currently, are provided by consultants, and we do have a multidisciplinary consultant team that is backing us up. It includes engineers, environmental professionals, planners, engagement specialists, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I know that Director Inkster is in line, but I'm going to move this ahead a bit because the whole OCP project has occasioned a great deal of conversation with the rural directors. And I'm not going to speak for my area right now because I think the correct thing to do is to go to my APC first and consult my APC on their concerns. But we got ahead of this so as not to be trying to make motions on the fly today. We drafted some motions, and I'm going to start with the first one, hoping that it will be seconded. So the first motion is that the report titled Official Community Plan Renewal Project Update be received for information, and further that this report be referred to the Advisory Planning Commissions, and that the APCs be asked to provide feedback on the proposed scope of the OCP review from the viewpoint of their electoral area's concerns, and also provide feedback on the engagement and communications strategy in Attachment E. And that any public engagement on the proposed OCP project be paused until receipt of the report from the July 16 public hearing on zoning and OCP amendments for the riparian area and shoreline protection has been provided for board consideration. And further, that the scope and timeline of the OCP renewal project be reviewed and approved by the board. Do I see a seconder? And I see a seconder, so it's on the floor. And Director Inkster.
That's a little difficult because you introduced a motion when I was on the list speaking to something previously. So I'm not going to necessarily speak to the motion based on the fact you introduced it. But I like your style on this one, Chair, because this is moving forward in a sense. And I hope the board has a fulsome discussion because there's a number of important pieces within your motion. The District of Sechelt, as I mentioned in our discussion last week, did an OCP, a large one a number of years ago, and it was the first one that joined all the areas after a number of years of having separate neighborhood plans. And so we were able to do that in about 18 months. And that was with neighborhoods, a number of neighborhoods that are different and in a sense similar to what you have in the regional district because of the size of Sechelt and the fact that we're ocean-based. So you can represent a number of your community's concerns and or needs through a process that has different pieces to it as part of your plan. It's doable, even though Director Lee says his community is different. We have really different parts of Sechelt. I think one or two areas didn't really want to join Sechelt originally. That's how different it is. So it's doable. But what I would suggest to the board that's going to be moving ahead and making the decision on that, and that's the rural directors, that you carve off pieces that you need to look at being done now. And I actually thought of Abbott and Costello when Director Lee said, who's on first, who's on second. And I would pick first the housing issue that was brought up. If you can look at dealing with some of the housing challenges through some amendments and or introductions. The reason I say that is in Seashell, we're looking at, as needs to be done, an OCP review and a reformulation. You need to do it every probably 10 to 20 years. But we are proposing ahead of that a number of changes to some densification and or some housing plans, because we need housing in Seashell. So we're putting, in a sense, sensibly, the cart in front of the horse, because we have some definite needs of housing in Seashell that everyone knows is leading to some social challenges as well. So I would encourage the board to look at those as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot in this single motion. I'm hoping to see it separated out because there's parts that I'm happy to move forward with and other parts that I have questions on whether or not I can support it. One of the questions would be in the section that is talking about pausing the OCP public engagement portion until we get a report on the July 16th public hearing. What is the impact on the project if it's paused? And when are we expecting to hear back on that? When are we expecting to see the report on the public hearing for zoning? And that's through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you for the question through the chair. The report back on the public hearing is planned for the November Electoral Area Services Committee. And impact on the project, as the project, as has been noted, does have a timeline that is lined up with the idea of having the project complete in time to meet the deadline for the Bill 44 bylaw amendments, be aligned with other local governments, and also be completed within the term of this board. Delays do have an impact on that timeline. Thinking of the project management triangle, a change to timeline is likely to affect aspects of cost or completion time or scope, and those would need to be analyzed. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if we could, as Director Stanford said, if we could pick off like 3 we all agree on, and then talk about the other ones to see if we want to change them or whether we want to actually go that way. Would that be satisfactory to the chair?
We could. I suspect the first 3, which is receiving the report, referring it to the APCs, and then asking a couple of specific questions to the APCs, is a pretty simple piece.
Yes, that would have been my suggestion. I believe those are a slam dunk for me anyways. And so if we ask the question of the first 3, I think we could get that out of the way and then talk about the other 2.
Okay, I think that's
okay.
a request to sever.
Yeah,
And I think I can just do that, can't I? Aha, corporate officer says yes. I sever. All right. So we have, in that case, what I'm going to do, unless anyone disagrees with the first 3 items of that motion, I'm going to suggest that I call the question on that. So that's the referral to our APCs and ask them for feedback on the scope and the engagement communications strategy. All in favor? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Your hand went up and down.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm all for the APCs being involved in this process. Is super important. What I'm concerned about is that there needs to be a big education piece for APCs in order for them to give us some really good feedback. Like, I think if there's no staff support and we send this document to the APCs and ask them, what do you think of the scope? I don't know if they would have the information necessary to make recommendations. So I'm wondering, how do we want to tackle this? Like, do we want to have a workshop with all APC members ahead of time? How much time would that take? Like, I think it's really easy to say, we're gonna send it to APCs, but I think we need to have a solid structure and plan for them so that they can really be successful at what we're asking them to do. So I'm just looking for ideas here.
And I will say that I agree with you, but I think all of us are struggling with the scope because there are so many parts of this plan that are not even in our jurisdiction. Like when we open says right here in the OCP thing that we're supposed to locate the location and phasing of any major roads. Well, we have no control over that. We're not even consulted on that. We have no idea what's going to happen with our roads. So it makes it extremely difficult. And in a later motion, we were going to ask for staff to give us a detailed outline of the scope with all of the what's in and what's out, and just a lot of it just for public information, like what is it that we can include in this and what can we not include in this to help us all get our heads around it. I mean, the scope of planning in our areas is complicated, and then with, as was correctly identified, all the other pieces that are out there in motion right now, like other reports and other strategies and other infrastructure work, it's complicated and it's confusing, and there are so many rabbit holes. Oh my heavens. But the APCs have been chomping at the bit to be involved in this for a year and a half. And they are our dedicated volunteers. They're the people in the community who are willing to step up and volunteer to deal with zoning and bylaws and official community plans. And we need to respect them and make use of them as a resource. Does planning staff have any suggestions here?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. Possible clarification that might help as well in terms of framework. I'll just point to attachment D on page 23 of the agenda, which notes what the LGA prescribes an official community plan must include and also what the options are. I look at that sort of as a planner to kind of put it in simple language, a little bit like baking a cake. So in the first part, what's prescribed, there's some basic components that you have to have in terms of the ingredients to make that cake sort of actually happen. But you can choose whether it's sort of chocolate or carrot and what sort of pan you put it in. Does it have jam filling? And then the options are more like how you decorate the cake. So from that perspective, as we look at what's actually prescribed, there's certain things that we must do. And there's a degree for each one, and without getting into down the rabbit holes as you suggest, on each one of those things at this time, we can decide how far we go to address the minimum legislative requirements. And part of the engagement strategy and hearing from our community will actually help us understand what themes are most important to our community and where are the areas of the prescriptions in the LGA that we want to go a little bit further on and be a bit more exceptional and be leaders in local government on, and what are the areas that we just don't have the resources for, and we can sort of create the basic policy and regulations in the zoning bylaw to meet the minimum expectations of the LGA and possibly go further in the future, but maybe not at this time. So those are options that we can continue to look at in terms of scope as the project moves forward and as we learn more from our APCs and from our community, and certainly within the board's wheelhouse to help us decide where we go on each of those issues. In terms of the second matter on the table was the APCs, and staff would be more than happy to attend the upcoming APC meetings to ensure that we can explain and answer questions and help to get the best result to help you get good information back from your APCs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just follow up. Absolutely, I think APCs are going to be crucial in this, and that's kind of what I'm getting to. I think we need to support them and help them with the task at hand, because it's huge, and we also have a lot of questions. We've never been through the process, so in this motion, we're asking them to provide feedback on the proposed scope, but then I'm hearing staff saying that the scope will kind of come out of engagement with the public. So which one comes first? Do we want to do the phase one of the engagement to get a sense of what the community wants as a scope, and then we ask the APCs to comment on it, or APCs are part of that? Like how, I'm just struggling, do we have a scope to present to our APCs?
Sorry, apologies, sticky buttons here. Thank you, through the chair. Starting with the last part first, yes, we do have a scope. There's the legislative scope of minimum requirements that Planner Jackson mentioned, and there is also a project scope, which is driven by the initial board direction on the project and on I suppose, the scope of the contract that we have with our consultants. And those two are pretty closely aligned. This is a pretty nuts and bolts project without a lot of additional work scoped in at this point for optional things. And then to the director's, the earlier part of the question about how to engage with APCs, we're in that mobilization phase where the input of APCs on the context in which we will need to engage people within electoral areas, because just engaging with APCs will not meet the requirements of the Local Government Act, but understanding from APCs what are the networks, who are the key people who have contextual information, access to groups that can be involved to provide a really comprehensive picture of what the issues are out there and how people see the future of the area, is high value and extends the reach that we as planners have. And so the initial round of engagement with APCs will be really focused on how we do this. And so yeah, thanks. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
In terms of scope, I'm going to point out that one of the absolutely critical questions in this process, and it will come up when we refer it, is how many OCPs? And we have not even decided that yet. And that's a pretty critical scope piece, because if we're doing 7 OCPs, or 5 OCPs, or 2 OCPs, or 1 OCP, those are all different. And I do understand that there's a desire to figure out, to not prescribe which way we're going, to actually get some feedback from the community, but it makes it difficult to describe the project when we are going out to our, and that's part of why I wanted to engage the APCs, because they certainly know where some of the pain points are of issues that have come to them over the past few years. Director Stanford.
I'm actually finding that going to the APCs without a prescribed decision, whether it's 1 or 5 or 7, is a good idea, because I want to see where the similarities are first, and then we would be more informed in how we then move forward as to how they could possibly be harmonized or not. So this is sort of what I'm looking for the answer through the APCs rather than prescribing it ahead of time.
Just a suggestion here, maybe we could put together a list of some questions for discussion, and we could go through it in advance of the PC meetings with the rural directors and staff to see what's reasonable. We do not want to go too far down too many rabbit holes, but I mean, that alone would be a good topic for discussion. Director Gabius.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and that's a great idea. I love that. I think, we need to come up with some questions for them to get the conversation started, I think. And I would feel better if I knew that there was, because this is such a complex project. It has so many layers to it, and I think we need an education piece before we go, like especially if we're looking for feedback from our APCs, I would really love to see like what we did for riparian shoreline area when we had everybody here and everybody got information and asked questions and kind of got a deeper understanding of the issue. So I think that would be so beneficial to the members of our APCs to get everybody on the same page, everybody get a high level overview of what what an OCP does, what the components are, what the timeline, what the steps are. So I think that would make our APC stronger, and I'm hoping we can make that happen if the board's into it too.
Thank you. That is not in the present motion on the floor, and I'm just going to, since we have a motion on the floor, I'm going to call the question on that motion to refer to the APCs. All in favor? Okay, that's 5 in favor, and there are 5 of us, rural areas. Thank you very much. The next piece of the motion was to halt public engagement until the receipt of the report from the July 16th public hearing. And the reason for that is that that particular series of amendments was presented as housekeeping amendments. And for something that was housekeeping amendments, it drew over 300 comments from the public. And that a lot of people were concerned and upset and perhaps not fully understanding the scope, but I think we need to deal with that. And we need to establish that we have heard the public feedback before we can go forward with more planning processes. So that was the reason for the next motion. So having severed, we now have 2 pieces, and I don't know if people want to handle them separately again. One was that the public engagement be halted until the public hearing report is coming back, which we now hear is on the November electoral area services, which gives time for the turnaround with the APCs. And further, that the scope and timeline of the OCP renewal project be reviewed and approved by the board. And so, hands are up. Director Gabius. Oh, sorry. Director Stanford.
At this time, I'm not in favor of pausing the whole project, in favor of waiting for the zoning amendments from the July 16th public hearing. It is important that we hear back from that report and recommendations from there. I don't see that as a reason to fully pause the whole project.
Just going to say that the wording is to pause the public engagement, not to pause the project.
Well, I think the public engagement is sort of the first step. So if the first step is not taken, it delays everything else. And then it then creates the reality of what the other concerns seem to be, is this is an unrealistic timeline. I think it doesn't have to be linear. I think we can do both. And I do recognize that learning about lessons on how that particular amendments was played out, and whether or not it was housekeeping or not, these are all valuable lessons that we can learn from. But I don't think it's necessary to pause the public engagement in this case. I think we can begin moving ahead, especially with the APC, and get their information and then work from there.
Director Lee.
I was just contemplating the timeline that now that we've decided we're going to go to our APCs, by the time we go to our APCs and we get a report on what was said there, that November report will have already been done and we will have already considered it because we're in October now and we have to go to our APCs. So I think it's redundant, actually, is if I've got how long it's going to take us correctly. So my question is, how long would you anticipate it taking to go from our APCs and back? And would this report be presented to us prior to the report on our APCs?
Thank you for the question through the chair. In contemplating next steps here, staff would suggest that the most initial and broadest part of public engagement would begin following consideration of the background report, which at the moment is proposed to be on next week's EAS agenda, and that would occur simultaneous with referral to APCs. And so there remains lots of opportunity to evolve and adjust both the engagement plan and the background materials following APC feedback, but these things would be occurring at the same time. Thanks.
I would just like to write the dates down then. So the background report is due next week, which is, what date would that be? Sorry? 17th. And there was a report in November on the public hearing recently held. What date was that?
The 21st of November is the November Electoral Area Services Committee meeting.
Yeah, November 21st. Good. Thank you.
Okay, I confess that I am confused at this point. Are we saying that the public engagement is not rolling out immediately, or are we saying that the board prefers public engagement to roll out at the same time that all of these steps are taking place? The engagement report we saw was not a draft, and the board are the very first people who have to be engaged in this because we are the ambassadors to our community. And I just wonder, because I don't fully understand where we are and where we're going. I totally get that we need to do this work, but I'm challenged by the scope and the timing. Director Stanford.
I'm not going to help you in any way. The public engagement is kind of starting. It's at the schools. It's ongoing, and I don't think we can necessarily stop a process that's in conversation. I'm comfortable with it moving ahead and learning from the lessons that I hope to see from the RAR report on November 21st.
Director Lee.
I do definitely need clarity. We're going to take the engagement and communication strategy to our APC for comments. And we're going to launch it before we get the comments. That's kind of troubles me a little. Do I have that right?
Staff, please.
Thank you. Yes, that is right. Taking the first step in the engagement strategy simultaneous with comments on the later, more detailed parts of the project. And that's a response to the requirements set in the Local Government Act for engaging with the community about community vision. And knowing that there will be opportunity to integrate feedback that's received in those early referrals. A consideration here is that October and November are an engagement sweet spot where people are more available generally than in the summer or over the holidays. And so keeping in mind the overall project timeline, there's a real desire to consider use of that sweet spot. Thank you.
Thank you. And once the provincial election is over, hopefully people will have a little bit of attention for other things. Every other OCP that we have done in the past had a committee. A committee of the public was appointed as the OCP committee, one of which never died. And that was the process. And I do not see that in this process, so I take it that there will not be an OCP committee.
Thank you very much for the question. You are correct. As you've seen in the engagement strategy, there's currently not a project advisory committee set up to govern the project. In its place, the engagement strategy has been built upon the board's equity lens, using a very intentional approach to go and meet diverse people where they're at in order to gather feedback from those voices, to gather feedback from all voices, but also from voices who are less typically involved in these types of processes. And the intended method to bring that feedback back to you all is in engagement summaries at the end of each phase. So at the end of the milestone for each phase of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. As chair, I think what I'm going to do right now is sever again, because we have been discussing the pause on the public engagement until such time as we get back that public hearing report. So let's just deal with that right now. I'm going to call the question, is there a pause? All in favor? Okay. Is there a pause on public engagement until the receipt of the report from the July 16th public hearing?
Okay, that's the one you're asking the question on.
Okay. All in favor? One in favor? All opposed? Two opposed? That fails. And the last item was that the scope and timeline of the OCP renewal project be reviewed and approved by the board. And that, over to our corporate officer, because I have gone off the rails.
I'm sorry, Chair. I'm just wondering if we could recheck the vote. I did not see a hand from the Area D Director, which would indicate a vote in the affirmative. Can we revote by show of hands, please?
Beg your pardon, I was forgetting. That's right. So I'm sorry, the motion passed. Can I call that vote again? Thank you. Yeah, I didn't vote at the time. I was sitting on the fence. I apologize. I will get off the fence. Yes, all right. Calling it again. Thank you. Thank you. All right, that we put a pause on the public engagement until we get the report from the July 16th public hearing. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, this time it does officially fail. Apologies to everybody involved, but given the the very, very, very long time it has taken to get that public hearing report, we're sort of between a rock and a hard place here. The last motion was that the scope and timeline of the OCP renewal project be reviewed and approved by the board. Okay. Okay, that's being seconded for discussion. Thank you very much. Director Lee.
We're talking to this motion, or are we making the motion?
We're talking to the motion. It is on the floor.
Okay, good. I understand that we are going to meet once a month to track status. And but I don't see it in the motion. Is that just in the engagement, or why do I have that impression?
We do have another motion coming that is about check-ins. So, staff?
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, the existing ways that check-ins would be structured would be framed around, this is current process. We have a budget project status report. This project is included in that. That's bi-monthly. We have quarterly departmental reports. And then there are also key milestone reports identified, the next ones of which have already been described as coming to upcoming committee meetings. But staff are, of course, happy to structure a check-in in whatever way works best for the board, and highly supportive of whatever mechanisms might be desired to ensure that we're working in alignment. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stanford.
I guess I don't really understand the intent of this particular motion, as to me, it is our job to be reviewing and approving the project as it goes along. So I didn't understand why this was being put forward.
The motions as originally put forward by staff do not include endorsing the timeline or the scope, only the engagement and communication strategy. And there has been no point that I'm aware of in this project that we have, in fact, endorsed the scope and the timeline of this project. Or if we did, it sort of got under the radar somehow, and we did not fully understand this because it was probably buried in the project status budget report. I don't know if staff has any comments on that.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I guess, objectively, at the time that budget proposals are adopted by the board, there's a scope and a timeline proposed. And at the time of contract award, I suppose there's some consideration of scope and timeline as well. But staff don't have any further comment on the issue being discussed. Thanks.
I think there is some confusion on the part of the board because the project was described as planning PEP, Planning Enhancement Project, which seems to have involved the OCP renewal, but I don't think there is in our update sheet a OCP renewal project as per such. And so this caught us a little off guard. Director Lee.
With a project of this complexity, I did review the budget and scope at budget time for all projects, DAPR, PEP 1, PEP 2. And I have reviewed the communications plan and engagement, which has some timeline in it. But I really have no idea of what's going to be delivered when and what it is, any description of what it is. So I personally am looking for something further, more detail, rather than when we get there, tell me what we just did. I don't think that's quite appropriate, but I will observe that it's not unusual for the projects we've been doing as well. So I was hoping for something a little different now.
Thank you. Director Gavious.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit like Director Stanford. I'm struggling to understand what we're asking for. Are we asking for a report, like a further report with more details on the scope and timeline so that we can review them and approve them? Or like, because we're asking ourselves, we're directing ourselves. So what should it be? And I think we're all, we're all willing to do it, but are we asking for further information? Is that the intent?
And indeed, yes, I would, in a further motion, like more information so that we can fully understand the scope and the relationship of these many projects to each other, and what falls within and without the SCRD's jurisdiction. And I realize that I say this a lot, but I would say that perhaps 80% of the problems that people approach me with are not in our jurisdiction. And I have to tell them all the time, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. So if you tell the public, oh, we want you to vision, and they say, we want our roads repaired, and you say, sorry, we can't do that. And then you say, well, we want our stormwater managed, and you say, I'm sorry, we can't do that. It's going to be a bit of a frustrating visioning process, is what I foresee. And so I think that we need to articulate really clearly to ourselves and then to the public what is within scope for our OCP renewal at this time. I mean, there could be a broader something later, but so that we can understand what we can do and what we can't do. Another thing people approach me about all the time is tiny homes. And that one is really outside of our control as well. So there's another one. I'm sorry, we can't do that either. So I personally would like to see some graphs, some tables or flow charts that articulate to me what we can do and it's in scope for this process, and then what we can't do because it's completely outside of our control. And that would really help me, and I think it would help our APCs as well, when we're going forward with this sort of thing. Even active transportation, connector trails, are sort of in our scope and they're sort of not. It's complicated. So it becomes really challenging. And the board would also like to see, and this may be coming in the upcoming report, some options about single or multiple OCPs and zoning bylaws. Now, that's a question to staff. Is that part of an upcoming report, some of our options, like how the OCPs and zoning bylaws interact with each other? Thank you.
Yes, Chair, it is.
Good. Then we don't need to go there. Over to Director Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. I think we keep chicken and egging it. Is that an adjective? I don't know. Action item. We need the vision. The vision is the community, and if the community says they want smaller homes, more rural environment with trails, and that's their overall vision. And we can say, yes, that's your overall vision. Here's where we can affect that, here's where we cannot. But we need the vision first, and that's where we're going out to the public. It's not just to the APCs, it's everybody. And so we can ask those questions. We just then have to be able to respond by saying, here's where we can work within our regulatory process, and here's where other agencies we could advocate to, but we don't actually have control over the specifics of a tiny home or the size of the roads and those kinds of layered issues. But we need the vision from the community first. That's how I see this.
Thank you. It makes sense, but it's not in the report. Director Lee.
I wish I heard Director Stanford before I put my hand up. But I see that we had a further motion below there that talked about what we wanted to see and what we didn't. And I thought if we did that motion, the last one, the one we're discussing right now, is not required. So it's we need to do one or the other, I think.
All right, I'll be traffic cop here. So we have a motion on the floor that nobody seems to be in favor of. Let's call the question. All those in favor of the motion to tell ourselves what we're doing? Any opposed? All right, that motion fails. Let's move on. I have a request for a 5-minute break. Okay.
How does staff?
Thank you. We're resuming our meeting, our exciting meeting on October the 10th of the Committee of the Whole. And I'm going to read a further motion in. I think some of it is already in the works, but then that, if it's already in the works, it doesn't matter. That a report be provided to a future committee outlining the options for an amended timeline and narrowing the scope for the official community plan renewal project to the legislated requirements, including staff resourcing considerations as part of the 2025 budget. And I'm going to just interrupt myself for a moment here because I had intended to do a preamble and got distracted. The board recently undertook a prioritization exercise. We have, as has been noted in a recent editorial in the Coast Reporter, over 200 projects circling, many of which have not been completed, and we are having difficulty managing all of these projects. And they are all significant and important projects, or we wouldn't have approved them in the first place. But there are a lot of needs at the regional district in many of the departments, particularly to do with water and to do with the landfill. And we are struggling to manage all of them. So when we went through the prioritization project, we realized that the single largest project in terms of staffing requirements for us right now is this OCP renewal project. And the question was reasonably asked, is this the one that we want to push through at the possible expense of a bunch of the other projects that we have? And what would be the implications? Like maybe it is, maybe this is our top priority right now, but I'm not sure that we have fully dealt with all the implications of all the projects we have. So we are trying to manage our priorities. I'm going to finish now reading the motion, which I should have done in the first place. Then I'm opening it up for discussion. And thank you, everyone, for your patience with me this morning. So I had requested a report be provided, and that the report includes a detailed outline of the scope of the proposed OCP process, graphics, tables, or flowcharts showing what is within and outside the SCRD's jurisdiction and the relationship between OCPs and zoning bylaws, and the options for single or multiple OCPs and zoning bylaws, and the operational, financial, and other considerations of that structure. And that regular monthly or bi-monthly check-ins be scheduled so that board members can be fully informed about the progress of the OCP renewal project. Just in case anybody is mildly confused, directors did receive these by email in advance of this meeting so that they had time to take a look. All right, I see Director White.
Yeah, I did get these by email. It doesn't mean I'm not confused, though, to be clear. I guess, I mean, there's a lot to, hopefully the dialogue will address some of the confusion I feel about what what this motion means. But one piece that I will bring up as a concern for our entire region, including the municipalities, is that I do think that there has been an expectation from the community, from our municipalities as well, that particularly in the case of water being a priority, that there was going to be an interest by the Sunshine Coast Regional District in trying to harmonize and expand our development permit areas in terms of aquifer protection and environmental protection to protect our watersheds and protect our environment. And I'm concerned that it looks like the board may be considering dropping that. So hopefully we're this conversation will enlighten me on that concern. Thanks.
Thank you. And I will say that right at this moment, we couldn't possibly dive into that because we still are fully trying to understand the scope of the OCP renewal project. Director Stanford.
There's a huge amount in this motion. I would like to see motions more simple to allow for some kind of response from staff that's not quite so directive, because it looks like this is a massive amount of work in of itself, which will take staff time, et cetera, to pull together. I don't think the official community plan can be defined that clearly. The implications of putting in one thing and not another just delays the process, and it becomes less of an overall project and just activities, which then lose their power and their importance as we move along. We will have to open these OCPs up. They do have to be renewed as a whole, not just individual sections. They all have impact on each other. I would like clarity, but I'm not sure if this is the direction to get that clarity. So I won't be voting in favor of this.
You said you won't be voting in favor of this. Okay, just to be clear. I realize the motion had a lot. We were trying to express the concerns that the rural directors are feeling. And if it's a little too directive, I can see that that would possibly be a problem. But we do, in advance of the budget process, need to decide how much of the SCRD's staff power and money is going to be invested in this project. And we do definitely need check-ins, and perhaps the EAS committee would be the most sensible way to go on that one. Since we have EAS committee meetings anyway, it doesn't create more meetings. Boy, it's quiet here all of a sudden. I know, there's a lot to discuss. Well, motion is on the floor. Director Lee.
It's not that I didn't have something to say. I was busy digesting what was just said. I must say I do agree with Director Stamford, is that we probably are being too prescriptive here. But I definitely would like to see more detailed scope at some point. But to say exactly what it is a little early, I think. I was wondering if we could change, and that this report also includes something acceptable to staff that they could do that would help us understand the scope a little better. I think they're the ones that could suggest whether this is included in the project already or could be changed to be put into the project timeline. So if I could hear from staff on their thoughts on that.
Right. So is some of this coming already?
Thank you for the question. Yes, some of this has come in the sense that there are, for example, there is a timeline graphic with today's report. Some of this is planned in terms of document structure, the one versus many and how things fit together. And further, other parts are certainly available and can be further illustrated or expanded upon, such as project scope. There are aspects reported in today's package, but if additional explanation or further detail is required or requested, it can absolutely be provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Your virtual hand is still up, Director Lee.
I'm not very good at drafting an amended motion.
All right, I'm going to make a suggestion that we drop the second and that with the inclusion in the report. We've discussed it. We've made it clear that's what we're looking for. It may be too directive, so that would get the motion to the first and third paragraphs. So the first, that we have a report on the budget impacts of this project, and then the second be the check-ins, regular check-ins. Does that narrow our scope enough to, or, yes?
I'm satisfied. Do you want me to make that amendment? Yeah, I'll propose
Okay,
that
that's moved.
amendment.
Seconded? Okay, that's seconded. So it's on the floor. And Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just reading the first that. And so if I understand correctly, we're asking to see what would it look like if it was a bare bone, only legislative requirements? Would that impact the timeline? Is this the ask? Like, just what's the minimum we can go for? So that we can make a decision whether or not we want go bare bones or go extra? Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I think it's been previously discussed a little bit. If we changed the timeline on this project, it has a number of implications, I realize, including for consultant contracts, which we do not fully understand, but do need to be considered as part of the 2025 budget process. Okay. Anything further?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just interested in knowing how, is this going to, what kind of an impact on the work plan is this going to have? Like, is this, providing such a report, is this a big ask, or is it pretty straightforward for staff?
Great question.
Thank you for the question through the chair. Reporting on current projects is already part of the annual budget process, and so this aspects of what I understand from this motion would already be surfaced within the budget process, and I don't believe it's a material impact on work plan to provide some additional information. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not seeing much else, so I'm going to call the question on the amended motion. Wait a minute, are we voting on the amendment first? We are voting on the amendment first to drop the middle paragraph. All in favor? Thank you, that passes. Now we have an amended motion on the floor for a report and a check-in. All in favor? And that passes. Thank you very much. I have a brief final motion that I hope nobody will disagree with. That the board write to the province expressing the near impossibility of planning for growth in our communities in the absence of any road network planning by MOTI, who are not even required to participate in our planning processes. Rural communities cannot meet the challenges of climate change without a climate change and emergency management strategy for our critical transportation networks. Seconded by Director Stanford. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Other regional districts are also expressing frustration in various aspects of Bill 44, which does not adequately consider the rural context. Next up is item 4.4, the Regional Accessibility Advisory Committee minutes of September 23rd. There are some there are some recommendations from this committee. Thank you, planning staff. You may now take a break. The minutes of the advisory committee include a number of recommendations that are purely internal to the committee, but they also include 3 recommendations that are external. Recommendation number 4, that staff, and that would have to be staff of the local governments, apply for grant funding to support the Accessibility Committee initiative. Recommendation 5, that the Town of Gibson student representative be appointed to the committee. And recommendation 6, that a letter be sent to the school district to inquire about their accessibility plan. Does anyone at the board wish to move those 3 recommendations? Director Gabius moves the recommendations. Do we have a seconder? And that is seconded. There is a little ambiguity with this committee because it is a committee of 3 different local governments. So when the committee directs staff to do something, it's not really clear whose staff. But I think we're going to have to leave that up to the staff to have a little arm wrestling contest over how this is going to be managed. I don't think we've ever had an advisory committee with 3 governments supporting it, so it's a little complicated. So I'm going to call the motion. All in favor of the recommendations? Any opposed? That passes. Thank you. We have come to the end. Sorry, Director Stanford?
Chair, I'm just looking on page 12 of the amended package, and there were some recommendations from the OCP renewal project from staff. Did we pass those?
No, we did not. We specifically did not. Well, we received the report. The number and structure of the OCP and bylaws should have been covered by our motion, and it is coming forward, I understand. The referral to the APC was covered, and I, for one, am not prepared to endorse the engagement strategy, but that's not until I've heard from my APC.
Okay, I was just making sure that that had been clarified. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Gabius.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I'm just, so community engagement, what happens, so if we don't endorse this document now, does this impact the engagement that staff is able to do at the, like right now in this like engagement sweet spot, as staff called it?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I'll tread carefully and with respect here. Engagement is occurring. There is a Let's Talk page live, and we do have a partnership project underway with prior board support. Often projects proceed without board endorsement of the rather operational engagement plans that support them. Those plans being in alignment with our overall corporate direction on public participation. In this case, board support or board endorsement was sought given the scale and scope of the project. The first phase of the project will be increased project awareness, some limited pop-ups, and there's a third component. I believe it's more material on the Let's Talk page. The majority of the engagement strategy that's attached here relates to detail on activities that would occur later in the project. And so I guess I will check that in the committee's perspective, the non-endorsement means that further input into the strategy would be preferred at a future time or is requested at a future time, and that proceeding with those initial steps is comfortable. And if that understanding is, if I'm picking that up correctly, then staff would proceed accordingly. Thanks.
Thank you. So we are at the end of the agenda. There is no public in the actual boardroom, and there is no public in the virtual boardroom, so I am not going to ask for public inquiries. But I will look for a motion that the public be excluded from attendance in the meeting in accordance with Section 91A, C, E, and K of the Community Charter. Can I see a motion? Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. We are going in camera. All right. You are catching the tail end of the exciting meeting of Thursday, October the 10th for the Committee of the Whole. And we're pretty much done. Do I see motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded. All in favor? We're done. Thank you.